Yes, sir. What's your name?
Rusty Black.
Hey, Rusty. How you doing?
Doing very well. How are you, sir?
Good.
I had kind of an application of the apologetics question. So obviously we prepare ourselves. I think most people in here, you don't really have a whole lot of atheists. We're pretty much believers. Not so much your family. You know, you pray for your family. You have a lot of opportunities to talk to them. And maybe not somebody that you see every day at work, but the passerby.
Right.
Obviously we need to prepare ourselves, read, learn from people that do this for a living. How do you draw the line between, we took a trip and we were talking about you, we were driving, and you have a good attitude when you talk to people that are illogical, they have these illogical views. How do you draw the line between winning an argument and reaching the end goal of pointing people to Christ? Like, you know, you're talking to somebody and they kind of take it in a bad way, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you decide? Because you talk to people all the time that are just random crew people.
Yeah, I think
not drive that wedge in.
I think that, first of all, Greg Koukl, my friend, has a great book on this called Tactics. I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it deals with all of these interactions you have with people and what questions you should ask and how you should deal with people when they get upset and all this. And one of the things that you might want to say if someone gets upset was just say, well, first of all, the question I think you should ask when people get upset is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because this seems to be more emotional than it needs to be if there are not emotional reasons for you to get upset. In other words, why would you get upset when we're trying to talk about facts as to whether or not God exists? Because there's a whole cadre of implications that flow from the question of whether or not God exists.
Well, not one of those innate implications includes that Christianity is correct. Even if you were able to provide actual evidence that the statement proposing a deity existed was true, that would not then mean your scripture or the beliefs associated with said scripture, with its many claims on right and wrong or the nature of the universe, would be shown to be true as well. Theism, being true, is a prerequisite of Christianity and not the other way round. Therefore, this boils down to little more than a game of bait and switch, where you start discussion on the existence of God before switching to the intended conclusion specifically of your God and their associated myths. But to give you a clear answer, allow me to respond on 3 levels. If you provided sufficient evidence that showed a God existed, would I follow Christianity? No, for there is no logical step to take to reach the conclusion that Christianity, along with all its mythos and claims about said deity, is true on this basis alone. If you provided sufficient evidence that showed a God named Yahweh who was the focus of biblical scriptures existed, would I then follow Christianity? No, for whilst I would admit that the Christian God was real, I would be repulsed by said God's rampant display of immorality in the sense of a complete lack of ethics by which they supposedly treat my fellow human beings. Knowing that your God existed would command my respect and devotion of them as much as knowing that Hitler existed demands my respect and devotion of him. I would admit to said God's existence, but that would be the end to the similarities between me and you on that matter. Only if you could provide sufficient evidence that A, your God Yahweh existed, and B, his teachings and actions were actually moral on a reasoned basis beyond asserted authority, only then would I in fact become a Christian. And by these actions I mean such things as genocide, mass rape and slavery. Only when you could show these values, which are biblical values and thus Christian values, are indeed justified, it is only then I would be able to become a Christian, and not a moment sooner. Now, whilst this needed clarifying, it also offers a possible explanation as to why someone would be displeased when presented with such a style of discourse. When you are faced with someone who has the habit of changing the claim within a single argument, that can result in discomfort and a lack of trust. So you see, how we react typically involves how you have asked us the question. If you have insulted us or attempted to manipulate us, then we will respond in light of that. What we also respond to is the way in which your religion has been allowed to infect every niche within our daily lives as secular-minded individuals, dictating our reasoned behaviours with your lackluster mythos. So there are also stakes involved alongside your approach as you attempt to maintain or sometimes even further discrimination of the religious kind. So maybe next time you face a non-believer who is angry at what you have said, ask them why. Don't just assume it.
In fact, let me be very blunt with you in here. Not that I haven't been so far. But I submit to you that a lot of the hostility that Christians experience, and it's mild compared to what they experience in other countries, but a lot of the hostility that Christians experience in America they're experiencing it because there's a new religion in America. And the new religion in America is the religion of sex. It's an old religion resurrected. No pun intended.
Thank you for giving a whole new meaning to "He has risen." Well, on one hand, I am glad that you didn't attempt to class the scientific process or having an absence of belief in a deity as a religion, and yet I still find your pretense that Christianity only faces problems due to its unrealistic perspective on human sexuality lacks basis entirely. Even the example you are about to use will shed light on this, so I'll go right ahead and let you clarify what it is you are saying.
And what I mean by that is that you notice the battles that we have culturally. They're all surrounding sex, right? Abortion, same-sex marriage, now it's contraception that have to be paid for in the Obamacare and all this. It's all these cultural things. It's all about sex. The University of Nebraska wants to keep Chick-fil-A out of their, or at least some students do, off their campus because the CEO believes in traditional marriage.
The irony of this is that the case of students protesting Chick-fil-A on campus brings into question your claim. Same-sex interaction has been a thing since the dawn of time and has persisted throughout countless oppressive regimes. And yet, said interactions were perfectly legal when Chick-fil-A entered the firing line, so what was the actual problem? Well, you yourself noted that the real problem here were views on marriage. But this is where things get a little messy. If the current conflicts were all about sex and little more, why would marriage be an issue? Surely those of us in the secular persuasion would be too busy with too much on our hands to bother with such platonic rituals. However, as can be seen, this is far from the case. So either marriage amounts to little more than sex, in which case why are you defending it, or you have things entirely backwards. If the types of battle Christians wage against the rationally tuned are a reflection of this new religion, and yet they have gone beyond sex in pursuit of platonic romance, doesn't that then mean what you are truly fighting as Christians is in fact a cult of platonic love? It sort of takes the wind out of your sails, doesn't it? The reality is, things are a little more nuanced than that, because there is no religion, simply good-natured people who refuse to sit idly by as you continue to enforce religious-based discrimination via weaponizing the law, an act which, by the way, is deemed unconstitutional in the United States you talk of by the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, that which is paraphrased so eloquently as the separation of church and state by none other than Founding Father Thomas Jefferson.
The reason I'm saying this is because the elephant in the room for many people is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. They don't want there to be a God, and they don't want you, if you're a Christian, to impose your morality on them. That's why there's so much heat. That's why there's so much aggression. That's why people will shout you down and get mad at you, because they think you're going to try and take away something they don't want taken away. That's really the issue. There are so many implications that come from this. It's more political than it is intellectual. Do you guys disagree with that? That's really the elephant in the room.
And yet none of this stands. You seem to be attempting to blur two entirely different fronts, that of whether God exists and Christianity is true, alongside the Christian right's continued invasion of other people's personal liberties. Whilst there are subpar reactionaries among the secular community, people whose goal is little more than to create drama, the vast majority of us do not react in this way when confronted with a theist. Therefore, you seem to be confusing people getting angry at you attempting to take away their human rights with people getting angry simply because you are Christian. The latter, for the most part, is pure fiction. People may not be entirely happy when a preacher knocks at their door at an awkward time, but normally it is not until the theist has insulted or even attempted to threaten the non-believer with violence that the gloves come off. If a strange person came to my door and said his boss would burn me alive unless I attended meetings and paid up, they'd receive much the same response. I would also call the police in that case, but sadly it's legal when the religious do it.
So I think when you're dealing with people on that, if they all get hot and bothered and they get angry with you, you don't want to go there with them. You just want to be calm and say, maybe we can talk another time. I'm sorry I upset you, and then go to somebody else. But Greg Koukle's book is great on this, and I'd highly recommend you get it. Just let me give you a few questions you can ask people when they say things. These are from his book. The first question is, what do you mean by that? Like, for example, Mr. Carpenter asked me the question about evolution. Do you believe in evolution? My first question is, what do you mean by evolution? It means so many different things to so many different people, right? You got to define your terms.
No. The term in popular use is pretty standard in referring to the scientific explanation of speciation through adaptation over time. The only confusion on this matter seems to come from the theist who perhaps has been misled by apologists such as William Lane Craig or Ray Comfort. Beyond those circles, this is not the norm. However, if clarification is really required, then it should be asked for. All it then displays is a lack of preparedness on part of the apologist.
Second question is, how did you come to that conclusion? Somebody says evolution is true. Oh, macroevolution is true? What evidence do you have for that position? What's your best evidence, right?
The best evidence is phylogenetics, i.e. the genetic mapping of ancestry, which has proven undoubtedly that all life we know of is related, however far back those points of division may be. To break this down, it would be easiest to take a clear example, e.g. the human species, and show just how it is genetically related to other organisms, other great apes showing the strongest relation, like a paternity test. However, to then support this in displaying a mechanism for how this could have occurred, I would likely resort to observable cases in which we have seen one species mutate entirely new genetic material that was beneficial to the entire population. I could use any number of examples to support my case, but possibly the most damning is that of E. coli observed in lab conditions. This pincer movement of evidence, not only showing what has happened, but how, makes for a rather effective argument. Lastly, I'd just like to call out the dishonest usage of macroevolution. This is a fictitious term utilized by anti-science apologetics as a last-ditch attempt to fend off scientific knowledge. What you refer to as macroevolution is simply any other evolution over time.
Third question is, have you ever considered that the evidence that could be used to point to a common ancestor could equally be used to point to a common creator or common designer?
Yes, I have considered it and found it to ultimately lack basis. Human beings replicate aspects of our designs in new ones because we are finite creatures incapable of doing otherwise. However, what we as designers can still do is change things in a way evolution cannot. We can always go back to the drawing board between models, and a lack of this ability would suggest a lack of designer. How does your assertion explain the singular tube we as a species have for both oxygen and food, resulting in a severe choking hazard? Evolution can explain it in the fact that evolution operates on what is pre-existing, but your design model only has a severe flaw. Then what about the placement of the reproductive organs and waste management, resulting in a myriad of health-related issues? Or how about the recurrent laryngeal nerve, which has its origin and destination within an inch or so of each other, and yet must travel all the way down into the chest cavity around the aortic arch and back up into the top of the throat? In such animals as fish, which lack a neck, this functioned fine. And yet in vertebrates such as mammals, which have necks, including the giraffe, which has the very same system, this makes for a very poor design indeed, if it were designed at all. The fact that we can see the evolution of these features, how they started and what the result was and why, is the final piece of evidence that dispels any form of competent design whatsoever without a doubt, let alone a supposedly supreme being with ultimate knowledge. So not only has it been considered, it has been refuted.
So those three questions, what do you mean by that? How do you come to that conclusion? Have you ever considered, can help you move a conversation forward. And you can see if a person really has evidence for their position. Many times they don't. They've heard a slogan and they just believe the slogan. And when you press them, and what evidence do you have for that slogan? They don't have any.
It is indeed surprising how often this is the case, yet not in the way you intended. The number of times I come across a theist who lacks any valid reasoning for why they hold their beliefs is astonishing. At least most secular-minded individuals have a basic understanding of the evidence behind evolution. They may not be able to talk about genetics, but they often know enough taxonomy and observable case studies to get them through. So do tell me, what should an apologist do when your questions ultimately fail them? There are a few things which I'd just like to add here at the end of this video. The first is a massive thank you to everyone who has donated to me via Patreon. Your fantastic support has given me the ability to keep this channel going, and I hope to continue producing content in the years to come. Secondly, I would like to thank anyone who has ever interacted with this channel. Your shares, likes and dislikes, as well as your comments of both approval and disapproval, have ensured constant feedback, allowing me to improve my work. Last of all, I'd like to express my desire that you treat any of the people displayed throughout the video with respect. Whilst it is true that ideas do not demand respect, and there are many in fact which deserve reprehension, we must be careful on how we tackle said ideas in ensuring we are not simply targeting the person. In short, be the compassionate side of reason. So take care, and I'll see you next time.